Well, thanks very much for having me. That's the first thing, and I suppose well, what I planned to say was why is it that I wrote this book, and really it's because what I noticed over the years and is that people, nobody's talking about Blake's visions. Everybody wants to call Blake a visionary, but nobody wants to talk about what the actual visions were, what they could be. To the extent, and although the book isn't really about this, the word visionary, to my mind, when applied to Blake, has almost become devalued. I mean, every day I read that Elon Musk is a visionary. So, so we have to be careful with those terms. And it's been my privilege as well to go to three major Blake exhibitions. The one at the Ashmolean in Oxford in 2017, the Tate one in 2019, and latterly the one in Cambridge earlier this year. And none of them, as far as I could tell, talk about Blake's visions. The Tate Britain, I was in there last week. It has a word about it in the current exhibition. So lots of people must come and go without knowing that Blake had visions. And so if you want my kind of steer on this about what the book is about, it really presents new evidence to analyze what I call the perceptual phenomenology. But that's a big term that you needn't worry about too much. But the big steer really is that Blake's visions can be traced back to certain sources. All of them have what I describe as neural correlates. So they don't have anything to do, as far as I know, with mind or with the unconscious. So in fact, if I ever do write about the unconscious or mind, I just know the same things as you do. I kind of guess that he's anxious at sometimes, he's stressed at sometimes, and I don't really know anything else. And all the things that I found are really because of the way in which his parts of his neuroanatomy, neurophysiology has kind of worked. So broadly, what happened is that Blake has these through his life, and we might even begin the book kind of hints at, but never uses the word that he was borderline neurodivergent, and I think that's what the word neurodivergent, which, as I say, I do not use in the book, came up while I was writing it as a way. It's a kind of an emancipatory term for people who have different neural degrees of neurological functionality, and I think that there's some of that in Blake. But the two major kind of findings, if you like, because this is an evidence-based book, it's a kind of a platform, if you like, a platform of evidence. So you don't have to kind of climb on board my book and go through it all the way through. You can look at it for yourself and see whether these things are kind of stand up to analysis. I think the book is the first one to talk about the verbal auditory hallucinations that Blake had. So some scholars in the past have talked about the visual hallucinations that he had, trying to describe what the visual visions were, but nobody has really talked about the verbal auditory hallucinations, which is primarily to do with synesthesia, which is probably, I think, the most important part of the book. Although a good half of it is to do with these visual ones, which appear in the paintings. When I use the term hallucinations, by the way, that's in a non-pejorative sense. This is the terminology used by neuroscientists. Periodically, they have debates in the journal articles about whether hallucinations is a good term to describe the things that they're trying to describe, and they usually revert back to hallucinations because at least everybody knows what that is. And one of the points I make at the end of the book is that it's really important that we kind of emancipate Blake from the charge which is still around, and I give evidence of this, that Blake is mad. You know, that kind of hangs about. And what I find particularly baffling, again, this is not in the book, is why galleries, art galleries and museums haven't latched on to this possibility that there's a neurodivergent Blake as a way of kind of reinvigorating the kind of audience for Blake, which we know is there. So again, as a general steer about what I think is that as far as I can tell, Blake's visionary experiences start very early. I mean, the one on Peckham Rye, if you remember, he's aged 7 or 8 years old and he sees this bright lights in the sky. Now, he looks up and he sees angels in the trees, if you like. Now, this is what I think is probably a migraine aura attack. Now, Blake didn't have the word migraine, and the idea of migraine was not around then. So in other words, now so he has a childhood migraine aura. Now, there's lots of research on childhood migraine aura. Did he have headaches as well? That doesn't really matter because these are visual things that he saw, the bright flashing lights, and this may be a source of other sorts of visual vision that he had. But the primary one that I discussed, because this involves some of the great paintings of Blake. In fact, a number of them are which are in Tate Britain, which of course has the big hits of Blake. You know, I always think of that. Tate Britain has the Blake's big hits collection, and so this comes to start off with this a biological psychologist called Heinrich Klüver, who dies in 1979. Now, keep that date in your mind. And in the 1930s and 40s, and he dedicated his life to this. He worked at the University of Chicago. He gave mescaline to people, and they had hallucinations. And after doing dozens of these, and getting sampled students or volunteers to tell him what they saw and to draw what they saw, they came down to 4 primary shapes, which he called form constants. So Klüver's form constants are a major part of the book. And these are tunnels. I always have to check it. I have my book here. Tunnels, spirals, lattices, which is a kind of checker work, if you like, and cobwebs. And all of these occur in Blake. Now, I should say that everything that I found in the book, they're not theories. These are not theories. They've all been backed up by experiments very recently, in fact. So 1979, Klüver dies, and he's found these things, but he probably didn't know their import, if you like. And along comes a biological mathematician, Jack Cowan, with a team of researchers, and by that time they know more about the primary visual cortex, which is at the back of your head, really, and how it's what it is shaped like, and they try to work out whether Clever's four-form constants actually work in a way in which they could be linked back to the primary visual cortex, hence the phrase the neural correlates. And it took them 30 years in two sets of papers by multiple teams of people, but they are the foundational kind of underpinning of this evidence, really. Part of something that I left out of the book, because it was just too interesting, was that they take the theory from Alan Turing. You know, Alan Turing's the code breaker. There are films about him. Well, at the end of his life, he was a gay man, prosecuted, and he was given conversion therapy. You know, I mean, I only found this out lately. Again, sorry, it's not in the book. They gave him estrogen implants. It's amazing stuff. But anyway, in his work, what he did was to convert what Turing did was to convert a two-dimensional kind of map of how the how well, the research problem he asks himself was, why do zebras always get stripes and why do leopards always get spots? You know, what would be the mathematical formula you'd need, even if you didn't know much about the embryo of a zebra or a leopard? What would it take? And so they adapt that to 3 dimensions. It's absolutely brilliant stuff. And as I say, you know, this work has been accepted now for many years. Of course, these two teams bring out these papers in 1979 and 2003, 2002 to 2003. And if you think they're wrong, I promise you that a Nobel Prize probably awaits you, because everybody's been using their findings ever since. But primarily, so to cut to the chase, really, these 4 shapes keep recurring in Blake's art. Now, the first ones that I found are around 1780, which is really early, and that's the one which the Tate Britain has, called An Allegory of the Bible. And you need to go and have a look at that, because it forms a kind of tracery and checkerboard, the paving, checkerboard pavings. It seemed to me to correlate with some of the form constant shapes. And so it goes on through Blake's work. And so what I try to do is I always try to set the first time I found evidence of these things, and then I try to go through it and find something in the medium term, you know, during his life, and something towards the end of his life, so we can have a final cut-off date, if you like. So again, on the clever form constants, I think these are intermittent. I think he valued them very highly, but I just don't have the evidence that when he does a painting that has these elements in it, that this is evidence of a new vision. But these were the things he would have seen as a vision. I should say that what he would have seen in these 4 shapes was projected from the back of his head, from his primary visual cortex, V1 they call it. There's lots of reference in my book to V1, and it's projected onto the retina. So it's called retinocortical mapping. In other words, those 4 shapes are mapped onto Blake's eye, whether he has his eyes open or closed, whether it's in darkness or in light. And what you can immediately see through this, and again, I go through lots of these examples, but I don't always have time to take the inferences. Why does he get so absorbed in John Milton? And and he writes this entire poem, which called Milton. And it's really because what he's constantly asking himself, it seems to me, or taking as read, is that Blake, though he was blind, would have seen these visions because you see them in darkness, you can see them with your eyes closed because they are projected from your primary visual cortex onto your retina. And so that is a kind of breakthrough experience. And curiously enough, the first historical evidence I find for evidence that people in the past knew about Clover form constants before Clover comes along and defines them is actually in Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan. He talks about the angles that you see in a darkened room. So I go through the paintings, and what I'd urge you to do is to read the book, and it's up to you to say, yeah, David, that's absolutely right, or no, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing these four shapes. And again, as a general rule, when he's illustrating the work of other people, he's not having visions, and so of course those shapes are not there. So it's only when I think he's working on his own works. And there's some evidence, that I would tentatively put forward that he even chose for his patrons people who were receptive to those Kluver-form constant shapes that he was showing in his art. But certainly they cluster. Before that 1795 period. There's lots of them in the early illuminated books, for example, which is where I know lots of literary scholars work. So you'll find lots of them going up to that point. Not quite so many, because what happens, I think, towards the end of his life is that he has synaesthesia. And I think that takes over in a way, and that some of the things that some of the stranger things in Blake can be found by looking at synesthesia. You see, I'm neurologically divergent myself because I have a stammer, and this is one of the great kind of findings of the movement of neurodiversity. Is that I know I've got a kind of a neurological tick or something like that going on. Well, if you think I'm not Blake, but if you think about it going on like that now. There's been a lot of research on synesthesia since about the year 2000. And really, if you've read a definition in the book is out of date, I can tell you that, because it's going on at a pace. And of course, it's this cross-modality of these senses where people the example I always use in the book is that if you say the word Tuesday, or people may see it as a color, so they may see Tuesday as orange. And so it's cross-modality, cross-talking of the senses. But the first hints that starts early in Blake, and the evidence is slender, but it is there, is in the marriage of heaven and hell. You know that phrase, which is referred to a lot, the enlarged and numerous senses, the enlarged and numerous senses. That's a pretty good approximation for a condition that is not really understood until the 1880s or 1890s. And that's when some important work is done. Francis Galton, but also somebody, again, who's been overlooked, Mary Whiton Calkins. She taught at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, and because she had students, she could ask them to come back to her and tell her about the things that they saw. So she had a ready-made survey sample, and that's what the modern neuroscientists do. Really, they're always trying to find survey samples of people who have synesthesia, and so she was a pioneer in that. I think she brings out the first journal article, in fact, that actually has the word in it. So that is marvelous. So one of the things, again, where I'd say one of the breakthroughs, I hope is in the book, is that I think I have a theory of the visionary heads. Now, when I say a theory, this is my theory, but the evidence that I put forward, I think, is based on the neuroscience. I have to say that I found it much easier to read journal articles on the neuroscience than I do humanities journal articles. They're much better laid out and kind of easier to easier to understand in a kind of strange way. Um, so there are different variants of synesthesia, but most of the synesthesia variants are caused by words and parts of words. So now this unfortunately for us all has huge implications for literary scholars who of course want to look at words and even at parts of words, individual letters. So the triggers that cause, say, in this example of Tuesday to be orange, might be a part of the word Tuesday. It might be the U sound, which is, a vowel sound, if the vowel sound seems to occur. So we just kind of have to get our heads around this. And one of the things that has been discovered, as I say, around 2005, is ordinal linguistic personification, synesthesia, OLP, where people, and again, Mary Whiton Calkins in the 1880s records these, people see letters of the alphabet as people, as personification, as personifications. And, recent, evidence as experiments have tried to do this. I should say that one of the things I also do in the book, by the way, is I always try to describe the experiments that have happened with Blake, happened in the neuroscience experiments, so that you can get some sort of idea of what they went on. So it seems to me that the argument I put forward essentially is that when Blake is in the rooms with, if you remember this, he's with John Varley, he's with John Linnell, and they're shouting out to him, Blake, draw as the man who painted the pyramids, or something, who built the pyramids, or draw as the person who taught you painting. And so there's a way it's which I kind of show in the book, that this hearing of the sounds, because these are not always sounds which you need to read, but which can be which you hear, parts of words triggered various memory surges in Blake, and so he kind of draws those things triggered by what Varley and Linnell are calling out for him to draw. Now there is, and I reproduce it in the book, there is in the Fitzwilliam Museum, there is a drawing made, I think, by Linnell or Varley, of Varley talking to Blake and in a state of animation. And so the more animated and excited that Blake is, the more likely he was to see these visionary heads. And so this, in one fell swoop, if you like, explains what I'm going to call the 1989 visionary heads. Now, those are the ones which are of the murderers and the poisoners, etc. Where did Blake get those personages? So they were obscure in Blake's time, but he calls them up because synesthesia helped him to do that, because it is a kind of a memory storage area, and it's a kind of a cross referral across the senses. And so because he's in that situation where it sounds like people gave him, things as I bet you can't draw this. And, he's got some kind of memory of that. And so this kind of triggers this visionary event. So one of the things we've got to get used to is also there's colors also work the other way around, if you like. So if Blake has as much synesthesia as I think he had, he probably saw colored words. So he probably saw colored words. And lo and behold, if you go to I think it's the copy of the Marriage of Heaven and Hell that's in Cambridge, blow me down, every word is colored differently. But of course, he's using different color palettes for the text, and we know the kind of variations that he's using. So this opens a big minefield, really. At the end of Jerusalem, and he's talking about the visionary forms dramatic. Now, I left it out of the book because I didn't find it in time. But blow me down, Blake talks about the unification of the senses, and he talks about the importance of every word and character. So every grapheme, in grapheme color synesthesia, every grapheme is a trigger for Blake. So it's a case of now, where do we go from here? Because as neuroscientists say, synesthesia is not metaphor. It's not imaginative literary events. It could be, but it could also be synesthesia. And if my evidence is right, that this carries on in Blake, and it probably starts early, around 1789, and then again, as you know, think of all those things that you've read in the early prophecies about, the corruption of the five, about hearing and sight and taste and everything. That's why he's doing it, really, because he's trying to work out, as he experiences these things without knowing what it is himself. He's able, because of course he doesn't have the terminology for it, so we have to kind of apply it. And now again, there's a scientific discipline called paleopathology, and so that, if you like, has the ethics of that. And that in the book, what I've tried to do is to follow the ethics of paleopathology. But you see, now, you may be skeptical, but how can David Worrall tell you something about Blake that he didn't know himself? And my answer really is that, unfortunately, with Blake, we've never had a healthy Blake. He's always been presented to us since 1785, when he puts his first paintings on show in the Royal Academy. Somebody, a newspaper reviewer, and says, "This man is a lunatic." And so that kind of madness hypothesis, has carried on. So we do not have a pure, healthy Blake. Although, again, one of the things that I do in the book is that I try to show that he is extraordinarily healthy, and he certainly has a very healthy primary visual cortex. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to, to see all those things. And so I spend part of the introduction, and I should say that the introduction is available free on Amazon. If you go to my copy of my book on Amazon, and it says free sample. Well, what the publishers did, and they didn't ask me about this, but they put the entire introduction on. So my introduction really is a big introduction, so it really does lay out, all these, the basis, if you like, of the findings. That's what those are the things that I've been doing. But as I've said, particularly with the cluviform consonant hallucinations, who are not the only ones that he had, and again, I go into other sorts. I mean, there's one which he has when he goes to Felpham. He goes to Felpham and he writes that poem about my first vision of light. Now, that is probably something called Shearer's phenomena. Now, conversely, it's not an hallucination. It's because he saw real images of the blood capillaries in his eye that you see against bright light. Because we know that when he went there, because he talks about the brightness of the sea and he talks about the beams of light from the sun. So that was probably an atmospheric effect, which he tallied along in his visions, if you like. So he had this kind of continuum of visions. And again, something I can't answer really is, just how he viewed them. As as I say, it seems to me that in his later life, the synaesthesia becomes more intrusive. It begins to influence part of Milton, parts of Jerusalem in the way in this kind of epic formats. Now, I'm writing a chapter in the book for Catherine Freeman's the editor. I'm sure there's several people that are viewing this are also on board this project. It's a Routledge book that will be out in a few years, I guess. Now, I take these ideas a stage further there. But the book that we have in front of us, my book, is, if you like, a basic platform of evidence, which I think holds together. It's backed up by lots of my reading and understanding of neuroscience, and that this is my best kind of spin. So what I really try to do, in effect, is to restore visions to Blake the visionary. And so that's all I have to say for the moment. Thank you very much for listening.